And now, Paul LeClerc, this is your last time you'll be giving testimony to this wonderful committee, and it's an honor and privilege. Go ahead.
Thank you very, very much, Chairman Recchia. My name is Paul LeClerc, and it's been my honor to be the President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York Public Library for close to 18 years. It's also a very special privilege for me to have had so many members of the City Council, not only as colleagues but as real friends. I think I've known, going down this side of the table, I've known all of you during your entire careers as elected officials, and some of you known you during your careers even before that. I'm joined in my testimony today by Dave Offenson, who's our Chief Operating Officer, Ann Carson, who is our Vice President for Public Service, and Sharon Hewitt-Watkins, who is our Vice President for Finance. I'd like to compliment all three chairmen who are here this morning, Chairman Recchia, Chairman Van Bramer, and Chairman Gentile, for their passionate espousal of libraries in New York City during their terms of office and during my chance to work with them. Each one has been particularly eloquent this morning in talking about what libraries mean to the city, but more specifically what libraries mean to the people of the city, as have my colleagues from Brooklyn and Queens. Having you as friends and colleagues has meant an enormous amount to me, as has having the speaker, the great speaker, Christine Quinn, as one of the leading advocates, sort of our Joan of Arc for libraries in New York City. And I guess I have to say that I won't necessarily miss testifying before you when the scenarios are as draconian as this one is, the worst ever in my entire tenure at the library. But I will miss having an official relationship with you, and I wish to thank you publicly before all these people and before the cameras for having been such stalwart supporters of the New York Public Library and all libraries in our town, and having been such very, very special friends to me. The reason we're here this morning is the obvious one, and that is to discuss the fiscal 12 executive budget and the impact that the mayor's proposed $39.8 or $40 million cut would have on the New York Public Library system. Either by design or by accident, this hearing is taking place on the 100th birthday celebration of the opening of the great library building at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street. And we are going to be rededicating that library this evening with 900 people in attendance. But if we can cast back our memories for 100 years, we have to keep in mind that what happened at that point was that New York City built the greatest library open to the public in human history. And it did so for a very, very specific reason. This isn't in my testimony, so you won't find what I'm saying there. It did so for a very specific reason, and that reason is chiseled into the marble walls of Astor Hall. And the reason is this: the founders believed passionately, just as Andrew Carnegie did, that a library is the cornerstone of democracy. And you will read inscribed in the walls of Astor Hall a statement to the effect that it is through education and through a library that civil society is maintained. Now, that message is as important today, I think, to all of us as it was a century ago. I'm tempted to say what's being toyed with here is the idea of taking apart one of the great, great things that makes New York the city that it is. It's public libraries and the services that we provide to millions and millions of visitors on an annual basis. And so the stakes are enormously high. I mean, this isn't easy stuff that we're dealing with. And I think that's what's important to contemplate is not only the scale of the reductions that are being proposed, but the impact that those will have on individuals throughout the city of every race, of every gender, of every orientation, of every economic class, and what the long-term consequences of the deprivation of library services are going to mean to those people and to the city that we all love. So the proposed reduction for the New York Public Library is close to $40 million, $39.8 million. And this proposed cut is in addition to cuts totaling $17.6 million that have already been posed since fiscal 08, for a grand total of $57.4 million reduction in our funding over a 4-year period. This cumulative 57.4, close to $60 million, means that the FY funding, excluding inflationary reimbursements, would be a full 40% lower than the FY08 adopted budget, which is horrific. At that time, the restoration to our budget was baselined, and both the mayor and the speaker committed publicly to fully funding 6 days of library service, getting libraries back to the deal that was made slightly more than 100 years ago with Andrew Carnegie. As you're aware, the level of cuts since fiscal '08 have made it really, really difficult for us at the New York Public Library to provide the type of library service that New Yorkers need, want, and deserve. This past week, our nation's second largest city, Los Angeles, approved a budget that closes a significant budget gap. But what's important to note is that LA's fiscal '12 budget, while closing the gap through cuts to a host of agencies, restored funding for Monday hours at libraries, increasing days of service there in LA from 5 to 6 days. A very critically important judgment, public policy decision that was made. This clearly highlights how critically important libraries are to American cities, especially during times as challenging as these. But my sense is that these times are not as challenging as they were for the city during the Great Depression, or even as they were during the great fiscal crisis of '75, '76. The idea of a staggering $40 million reduction in city funding is beyond painful for me and my colleagues to consider. And it makes me ask the question that so many New Yorkers are asking me. Why on earth would anyone even contemplate, let alone propose, doing this? I had a chance to meet with the wonderful writer from Sierra Leone, Ismail Bea, on Saturday night. And he said, "How are you?" And I said, "Well, so-so, because the city is proposing a reduction of $40 million. And he said, "Why would they do that?" I don't have an answer to that question. And I hope that when the dust finally settles and the negotiations are concluded, that we'll be far away from that very, very low figure. So even though I don't have an answer to the question, I can tell you what the consequences of that kind of a reduction would be. But first, let me tell you where libraries are, where our libraries are in terms of their use by New Yorkers. Over the past year, millions and millions of New Yorkers have used the New York Public Library's programs, collections, and services in numbers even higher than in last year's record levels. The proposed cuts would force the library to make great and substantial reductions to staff, hours, programs, and collections. We would be forced, in effect, to severely limit the people's right to free access to information that is the heart of our business in public libraries. Despite the continued downward trend of city funding, the New York Public Library continues to experience a system-wide surge in use, just as our sister libraries do. For us, last year alone, there were 15.4 million physical visits to our branch libraries, 2.4 million physical visits to our research libraries, and 25.4 million visits to our website, nypl.org. 21.4 million items were circulated, and even more were consulted from among our collection of over 50 million books and other materials in 300 different languages and dialects. Last year, 31,340 New Yorkers attended job-related classes at the library. These classes remain vital to New Yorkers who are out of work, who are looking to change careers or start a new business. Our librarians and our volunteers provide a one-stop shop for job-related assistance throughout our entire system at every single one of our 90 facilities. Last year, more than 43,000 programs and classes were offered system-wide with a whopping record-setting attendance of 826,000. Now, I, like my colleagues, fully acknowledge that these are difficult times for the city and that they pose a challenge for all of us. And over the last 3 years, you've asked all city agencies, as well as libraries, to do more with less, and indeed to do more with considerably less, and we've done that. And the results of that are cited in the numbers, are proven in the numbers that I cited just a moment ago. However, the savings that have been created by our current service model, which have allowed us to continue to provide New Yorkers with comprehensive library service, even with significantly less funding, is now at its breaking point. The New York Public Library has very little room to create additional efficiencies than it has already. Our workforce has already been reduced by 423 active positions, part-time and full-time, since July 2008, an 18% reduction in headcount. And our average hours of service at all locations are presently 46.4 hours, a 12% reduction from 52.7, which we reached in early fiscal '09 with 6 days of funding. To accommodate the new proposed reduction of $40 million, we estimate an additional reduction of 687 positions, 615 of those through layoffs, nearly 1 in 3 of our staff members. The library's average weekly service would be reduced to 4 days a week, and we would have to consider the possibility of closing libraries. We would also have to cut the library book budget by 1/3. The greatest impact of these cuts would be felt by the most vulnerable groups served by our library: children, seniors, immigrants, non-English speakers, and especially those living below the poverty line. It's important to keep in mind that in our 3 boroughs, Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island, there reside 47% of the city's population with household income of less than $25,000 a year. Specific impacts include the following. First, 10.2 million or 42% fewer items would be circulated, with 3.1 million fewer to teens and to children. 6.2 million to 35% fewer visits will be made to libraries, almost 2 million fewer visits by children and teens, 380,000 fewer visits to library programs by young people, close to 2 million or 44% fewer computer sessions, and severely reduced access to seniors who often use the library in the morning. And we all know it's far better for them emotionally and psychologically and socially to be in a library than to be home alone. 14,200 fewer slots in career counseling sessions and job classes, 1.4 million fewer visits, and 2.3 million fewer materials circulated in our lower Manhattan libraries, where 72% of the families earn less than $50,000 a year, and 45% of residents do not have a high school diploma or its equivalent. In the Bronx, we anticipate 1 million fewer visits and 1.2 million fewer materials circulated. And the Bronx is a borough in which 82% of families earn less than $50,000 a year, and nearly 50% of the residents of the Bronx don't have a high school diploma or an equivalent, and only 33% of residents are native speakers of English. So if you want to think about a borough in which people can't afford to buy books, don't have computers at home, need help in learning English, think about the Bronx. On Staten Island, we anticipate 627,000 fewer visits, 1.3 million fewer items circulated, 2,300 fewer programs, and 43,000 fewer visits by school-age children to library programs in our Staten Island branches. The real impact of these numbers comes in the everyday lives of New Yorkers. Over the last few months, as part of a farewell tour that I'm making to every single one of our 90 facilities to thank our staff for their service and for their dedication, I've had the opportunity to meet with many, many people, both staff members and patrons, who talk about what the library has meant to them and how it's changed their lives. And I'd like to share, in concluding, just 3 samples of these sort of impact statements with you. First, Anthony Suarez. He always had a calling to help others, but when he found himself out of work and in a shelter because he had no way to pay the rent, it wasn't easy for Anthony Suarez to admit he needed help himself. But after turning to the job search resources at the Bronx Library Center, Mr. Suarez was able to get back on his feet and land a stable job as a caseworker with the city and return to helping others again. And I quote what he told us: "The library gives people the tools they need to move off the breadline and onto a bank line," Mr. Suarez said, who now wears a suit and is working his way up at the city agency he joined 2 years ago. "It would have taken me a lot longer to find employment and get back on my feet without the library." Second, Nancy Liu, who immigrated from China to New York City 9 years ago and is proud that her 2 young children speak perfect English. But in order to keep with her kids, Ms. Liu is learning to read and write English for the first time thanks to the free classes at the New York Public Library Center for Reading and Writing at the Seward Park Library in Chinatown. And she said, "I wanted to understand my children in English and help them with their homework." She now aspires to improving her English further so she can look for a job when her children ages 4 and 6 are older. "When I used to see books in English, I felt so dizzy I couldn't understand anything. Now the library is teaching me to read and I'm learning." And finally, Pedro Munoz, a junior high school dropout and recovering addict who had never, ever set foot in the library until 2 years ago. And now the Tompkins Square Library here in Manhattan is his favorite spot in the city, the place that gave him the strength to turn his life around. And he said, the library saved my life. Without it, I would still be out there on the street. And Mr. Munoz has been learning to read and write at the Free Adult Literacy Center at Tompkins Square, and said, the library has given me hope and confidence, and he's now inspired to go on to earn his high school diploma. The library is the most important place for me in the whole city. There are millions of stories like this that could be told by the three of us who are testifying this afternoon. Libraries provide hope to the economically disadvantaged, inspiration to the new immigrant, and a safe and nurturing space for those in need. Most importantly, libraries are helping people find their future. They serve as centers for collective creation, learning hubs, digital pioneers, and an essential community resource. To the constituencies we serve, all of us, all three of us, they're very often their only and their last resort. So today, we celebrate the 100th birthday of what's now called the Stephen A. Schwarzman Building at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, a library that is the envy of every city in the world, and has served as a beacon of hope for all New Yorkers in their pursuit of knowledge. As we begin this new century of service at 5th Avenue, it could not be more important to New Yorkers that all of our libraries stay open. Sadly, regrettably, tragically, a 40% reduction in city funding since FY08 puts all of that at stake. Hours have already been reduced, 423 jobs have been lost, and as you, the members of the City Council, are friends and supporters for so many years, as you debate and negotiate the FY12 budget, we urge you, basically I plead with you, to help us stop hundreds of proposed layoffs and to help us keep library doors open. You will make all of us very happy. More importantly, you'll make the people happy. And finally, Andrew Carnegie will be smiling upon you from heaven. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.